Today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about painting the ordinary. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard about still lifes. And typically, the still lifes I've seen are flowers, fruit, a vase, a couple of sundry objects from someone's collection. I decided to push that a little bit more, and what you're looking at is a work in progress of a still life of ordinary tools. And these are tools that I found my husband had and still uses in our basement. I'm going to show you the still life photograph I set up, which I'm not a photographer, but I have a background in video production and film production, so I know a little bit about setting up shots. I really liked this photograph. I think it speaks for itself. But then I thought, well, what if I painted this as a still life in watercolor? And I like using watercolor with this because I find the watercolor is more illustrative. I sketch everything out first, very carefully, and I make adjustments. And one of my students said to me, "Oh gosh, I have so many things I have to erase when I sketch." Well, unless you're really practiced at drawing, yeah, that's going to happen. So at this stage of the game, I've started on these old nails. I like the rust in them. The hammer, I'm starting on the texture of this. I'm not even going to guess what this is, some sort of scraper. I have to double check what this is. And I found an old piece of wood in the basement left by our previous owners, and I'm going to be working on texture. But I think the important thing in this that I wanted to bring out is painting ordinary things and looking for the things that you wouldn't expect would make a great painting. This is the fourth painting I've done in a series of tools that I have with pictures that I set up as still lifes. So stretch yourself a little bit and think out of the ordinary. Don't paint the usual, the apple, the flowers, the vase. You can make something ordinary look really good. And I'm going to focus on that in this video and give you updates and a little background information about why I chose to paint this. I wanted to share with you some of the colors I'm using on this still life of old tools that I'm doing. And I'm using a lot of burnt sienna, ultramarine blue to make grays and browns. I'm also using some cadmium orange to bring out some of the wood tone. And I'm just starting to put texture in on the hammer handle. I also threw some sap green in there because every tool has a little mold if it's been sitting around for 40 years. The tool over here, what looks to be a scraper, is primarily a gray mix of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. I'm trying to keep a lot of white in there because it is a piece of metal and it reflects. And I'm starting to think about what I'm going to do for my background, and I'm toying with a mix that I use quite a bit of magenta, ultramarine blue, and burnt sienna, and I can get various darks and different variations on grays. Thinking in terms, and it's a stretch here because we're not doing a portrait of a person, but thinking of how the masters had painted their portraits and had done diffused dark backgrounds. Of course, they did this in oil, and I'm working in watercolor right now. So that's the basic color palette. This piece of wood here has a lot of yellow in it. So I used cadmium orange, cadmium yellow, and some lemon yellow, also with burnt sienna. And I started putting some darks in the wood. I have a long way to go on this. And the darks are the gray mix of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. And I'm going to show you my reference again. You can see how the wood is almost a honey color. And you can see the gray and the metal of that scraper. and the gray and the metal of the hammer. I wanted to overemphasize the rust on those nails, so I tended to make them a bit more red. No, you're not imagining things. The painting is upside down, and there's a reason for it. I like the drips not to go directly down my painting. I want them to go up, and I don't work very wet, to be honest with you. I tend to work very dry. I just feel I have more control over this particular part when I work upside down. And I used, let me see if I can get that in front of you, just a 1-inch flat. This is by, who is this by? This is Princeton 1-inch Velvet Touch, not an advertiser. But you know, I like these because they have a very good snap to them. This one's damp. And a lot of watercolorists like those really moppy brushes. And for me, that works occasionally, but I like to have a bit more control. And these are the colors I mentioned in the last video. This is the mixture of ultramarine blue, magenta, burnt sienna. And what I did was I wet the paper, pretty much, not awfully wet, I keep it moist. And I just started charging those colors in, meaning just dropping the color in with that 1-inch brush and letting it work. And you'll see more when it's right side up, but you can see the textures here and there. And I'm thinking about it, I might do some sponging and splattering effects. Now, I tend to be a perfectionist, and when I started seeing those dark colors creeping into that piece of wood, which is not done yet, I kind of went, oh my gosh. And I held off cleaning that up. And I might even use that as an outline of that wooden piece. And again, this is upside down. And I'll right side it up for the bottom of the painting using pretty much the same color palette, maybe going a little grayer. And let's move over here so you can see my messy palette. And sorry about the reflection of the ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. I tend to take the ultramarine blue and I mix it up with the magenta, and I throw in a little bit of burnt sienna on the side. I like to keep some of the burnt sienna very clean and not mixed. I let it mix on paper, but then I do a series of grays with the ultramarine blue. And the palette's pretty messy. I regret not using a larger palette for larger areas like this, but I've done it for years, so it works. And it's going to have to be a lot darker, but I was fighting the white of the paper with the rest of this, so I thought maybe it is better to go ahead and get color everywhere. One color plays against the other. You probably know that from your own painting. So for me, it's better to have color everywhere on the painting that I'm doing rather than leaving all the paper white. There comes a point, and I think I'm at this point, where I really need to trust my process. I have found when I do something different, unusual, freeing, I hate it. And why is that? Probably because after 30 plus years of doing the same thing, I might be a little bit afraid of doing something different. Now what you're looking at is a whole lot of color. A lot of magenta, ultramarine blue, I can't say ultramarine blue, sorry, and burnt sienna dropped onto paper, semi-moist paper, and it's pretty much dry now. Problem I'm facing is that these nails are kind of disappearing. Not sure I like that, but you know, I have not done a whole lot of work on the wooden part of the handle of the hammer, the head of the hammer, the scraping tool, the metal part of the scraping tool, this wooden board. Also thinking I might want to go darker. But what I think I might do is do some sponging and darker on the background. But right now what I've done is I have a lot of color on my paper, and what I'm using arches cold press, 140 pound. Arches is one of the best papers you can use, and I feel I can just go crazy and moisten and lift and scrape, and it's not going to affect it. I'm going to let the background sit for a while. I love some of these textures. I know they're going to be covered up. I may sponge. I may take something like Mr. Clean Magic Eraser, no sponsorship, and streak some things to make that background abstract. And the next thing I want to work on is these items. How am I going to bring them out? I feel that they are kind of getting lost, those nails, or are they? So that will be the next step. And this is the point where I feel very uncomfortable, very frightened in a way, very cautious, because I just let the paint and the water do the work and painted what I felt, as opposed to doing something that is so precise as these particular tools. So I have to get over that, as you do too, when you're doing something different, and just let it come. I should know how to do this after 30 years. So we'll see what happens on the next step. I did this yesterday, and I really wrestled with this all night long. So I went in this morning and I darkened the area before, and I'll throw a picture in here of what it looked like, before it matched some of these purples and stuff underneath. And that really bothered me. I thought it was too intense, too bright. So what I did was just took a mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna and just made a dark grayish black and just took a wet brush, put it in the mixture, and painted on top of it. I didn't moisten the paper. I just went ahead and basically put it on dry paper. And even though I haven't done any detail work on that piece of wood, it really does pop a lot better. And attempts to not mimic, but look similar, or to what inspired me on this original still life photograph that I took. Now, as far as down here, I think what I'm going to do is take a lighter wash of this dark valued wash and bring it down to this area here. And I'm also thinking, before I even start that, of lifting a little bit of color on those nails, because as I look at it, the color on the easel as I'm watching it doesn't really pop. It looks nice and bright here, but it doesn't pop for me on the easel. I went ahead and I darkened the bottom, or the tabletop or surface where all the tools are resting. And this looks a lot more pleasing and along the lines of what I had wanted to do with this. And I cleaned up some edges that got I don't know if contaminated is the right word, but that ended up getting color where I don't want it. And even without building the texture and increasing in the color, these tools and that piece of wood now appear to pop a bit more. What is my next step? Well, one of the steps that I took, in addition to cleaning up the excess paint, excuse me, my throat's a little weird today, cleaning up the excess paint on the surfaces and the edges, is I lifted some of the color off of these nails so they're more predominant, and I'm going to be building on that with a brighter palette of color. And so that the next step is we're going to start building on surfaces. Surface of the nails, the tools, and then also, I love doing wood surfaces, the surfaces of the wood up here. So that'll be our next step in this video. Well, I finished, and let's take a quick tour of what I did most recently. I added some shadow falling off the handle of the wood chisel onto the hammer. I kind of add a little bit more shadow on the underside of the hammer to give it some shape, some three-dimensional shape. I didn't do very much else, honestly. I straightened out the edge of the chisel here and there. Now, this is not perfect. This is not a to scale perfect drawing nor a perfect painting. This was not the point of this entire exercise. The point of this exercise was to paint an unusual still life using a limited color palette, and I think I succeeded. Here you see my original reference photo from a picture that I personally took and how I interpreted it. I made the wood kind of wider. The chisel isn't spot on, but what I'm trying to do is to get away from making everything so precise when I'm working. I don't have a title for this yet. I signed it, but I have to think about a title. I've done this is my fourth in the series of old tools. I think I have one more that I want to do. Kind of running out of old tools. I think I'm going to have to hit the antique stores and flea markets. But that's the exercise today and how it came out. I added some shadows, I cleaned up some edges, and that's it. So consider using unusual objects in your paintings and in your still lifes.